I will look for information about the structure you mentioned to create the script exactly as you prefer. There is a warship that disappeared from the waters of the Pacific after testing a weapon so devastating that governments around the world refused to admit its existence. A technology that violates international treaties and was developed in absolute secrecy during the 1980s. And what happened to that ship and its crew of 240 men remains one of the greatest military mysteries ever documented. 1983. In the midst of the Cold War, when Americans and Soviets were competing for military supremacy in every corner of the planet, a top-secret project was being developed at the naval facilities in Vallejo, California. Its code name was Project Poseidon, and only 17 people at the Pentagon knew exactly what it was about. The objective was to create a weapon capable of neutralizing entire fleets of enemy submarines without leaving a trace, without radiation, without physical evidence of an attack. An invisible, silent, and absolutely lethal weapon. The USS Cyclops, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser modified specifically for this purpose, was the ship chosen to be the test platform. Its radar systems were completely redesigned, its engine room received additional nuclear generators capable of producing absurd amounts of electrical energy, and the entire central section of the ship was transformed into a shielded laboratory where scientists worked on something that defied the known laws of physics. The crew themselves didn't know exactly what they were transporting, only that it was classified as black level, above top secret, and that direct orders from the White House demanded absolute secrecy. The technology behind the weapon was based on research into low-frequency electromagnetic resonance. In theory, it was possible to generate electromagnetic waves so powerful that they would interfere with electronic systems and even the molecular structure of ocean water. Imagine creating a vibration so intense that it would literally disintegrate any submerged object within a 50-kilometer radius. It seemed like science fiction, but laboratory tests had been too successful. Small prototypes could vaporize tanks full of water in seconds, and scientists believed that a full-scale version could render enemy submarines completely useless or even disintegrate them in the depths without leaving a trace. On March 15, 1984, the USS Cyclops departed San Diego on its final mission. Aboard were 240 crew members, 12 civilian scientists, and the device that would be tested for the first time in real open ocean conditions. The destination was a remote area of the Pacific, more than 3,000 kilometers from the American coast, far from trade routes, far from any witnesses. The area had been declared a military exclusion zone, and patrol aircraft ensured that no vessel approached. The test was scheduled for March 23 at 3 o'clock local time. The Cyclops' last radio signals were received at 2:45. The captain reported that everything was ready for the test, that the systems were operational, and that the countdown had begun. The Naval Command's response was short and direct: authorization to proceed. 3 minutes later, at 2:48, seismic monitoring stations in Hawaii, Japan, and Australia simultaneously detected a massive anomaly. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't an underwater nuclear explosion. It was something completely different. The seismographs recorded a wave pattern never seen before, a vibration that propagated thousands of kilometers across the ocean, an energy signature so intense that it saturated all the sensors. And then, absolute silence. The USS Cyclops simply stopped responding. All attempts at contact failed. The ship had disappeared from radar, from satellites, from everything. 16 hours later, a search and rescue operation of gigantic proportions was mobilized. Warships, submarines, patrol aircraft, everything was sent to the area. But they found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no life rafts, no bodies, not even fragments of metal. It was as if the Cyclops and its 240 crew members had been erased from existence. The divers who finally reached the area days later reported something disturbing. The ocean floor in that region, almost 5,000 meters deep, presented a perfectly circular crater 200 meters in diameter. The surrounding rocks were vitrified, transformed into glass by extreme heat. But there was no radiation, no chemical residue, nothing to indicate a conventional or nuclear explosion. It was as if something had simply vaporized everything within a specific radius, including the water, the ship, and everyone on board. The United States Navy classified the entire incident as top secret. Officially, the USS Cyclops was reported lost in an unspecified training accident. The families of the crew received vague notifications without details or satisfactory explanations. All documents related to Project Poseidon were locked in vaults that will not be opened for at least 75 years. The scientists who worked on the project were dispersed to different facilities around the world, forbidden from communicating with each other, and forced to sign confidentiality agreements that threatened them with life imprisonment should they reveal any information. But leaks happen. Over the decades, fragments of information began to surface. A retired engineer revealed on his deathbed that the weapon had worked perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. A former intelligence officer admitted in an anonymous interview that the device created a chain reaction that no one had predicted, a resonance that exponentially amplified its destructive power. Some say that the Cyclops didn't sink, but was instantly disintegrated along with cubic kilometers of ocean water surrounding it. To this day, occasional dives in the area reveal inexplicable magnetic anomalies. Compasses spin uncontrollably, electronic equipment fails for no apparent reason, and fish simply do not inhabit that region of the ocean. It is as if something has permanently wounded the very fabric of reality at that point. The American government vehemently denies any knowledge of experimental electromagnetic resonance weapons, but documents partially declassified in 2017 confirm that research in this area was conducted during the 1980s, although all specific details remain censored. The USS Cyclops was never found because perhaps there is nothing to be found. The weapon it tested may have been too powerful, a technology humanity developed before fully understanding its consequences. 240 men paid the ultimate price for that ambition. Vaporized in a fraction of a second, their molecules scattered across the Pacific Ocean, and in some locked vault at the Pentagon, the detailed plans for that weapon remained stored away. A grim reminder that some technologies are too lethal even for those who create them. The story should have ended there, buried along with the secrets of Project Poseidon. But what happened in the months following the Cyclops' disappearance made everything even more disturbing. In May 1984, just 2 months after the incident, 3 Soviet submarines patrolling the Central Pacific reported simultaneous failures in their navigation systems. The 3 submarines were forced to surface, completely disoriented, approximately 400 kilometers from the area where the Cyclops had disappeared. Soviet commanders described a feeling of pressure in their ears, unexplained nausea among the crew, and instruments that simply went haywire, showing impossible readings of magnetic fields and water temperature. The KGB immediately suspected a new American weapon. Reconnaissance satellites were redirected, spy ships were discreetly sent to the region, and Soviet divers began their own investigations of the ocean floor. What they found made them retreat immediately. There was something wrong with that area, something that went beyond any conventional explanation. Dead fish floated in perfect circles around the crater, their internal structures completely disintegrated although their skin remained intact. It was as if something had cooked the animals from the inside out, using a specific frequency that affected only soft tissues. A Soviet intelligence officer named Viktor Petrov, who would later defect to the West in 1991, brought with him classified documents that confirmed the darkest suspicions. According to internal KGB reports, the Soviet Union had detected the electromagnetic pulse from the Cyclops test at its own monitoring stations. The energy released was so massive that it temporarily interfered with satellites in low orbit. But the most frightening thing was the conclusions of the Soviet scientists who analyzed the data. They calculated that if the weapon had been activated with just 20% more power, the resonance wave could have propagated throughout the Pacific Ocean, potentially causing catastrophic failures in all operating submarines and ships, both American and Soviet. The United States had nearly triggered an accidental naval apocalypse. Worse still, not even the scientists of Project Poseidon had fully predicted what would happen. Leaked documents years later revealed that theoretical calculations indicated a zone of effect of no more than 50 kilometers. But reality showed that the resonance had amplified through layers of water with different temperatures and salinities, creating a cascading effect that spread for thousands of kilometers. The ocean had become a natural amplifier of the weapon, and the Cyclops was positioned right in the center of a perfect convergence zone where ocean currents and geological formations created the ideal conditions for a catastrophe. In June of 1985, a Japanese fisherman found something floating in the waters east of Midway. It was a coin-sized piece of metal, but with impossible properties. The metal was extremely light, almost like aluminum, but tests showed it was an alloy of titanium and other elements that did not naturally exist combined in that way. The molecular structure had been rearranged by heat and pressure to levels that no known industrial process could reproduce. Metallurgical experts who secretly analyzed the fragment confirmed that it could only have been created by exposure to temperatures of tens of thousands of degrees for an extremely short period, a fraction of a second, which was consistent with a massive and instantaneous release of energy. That tiny piece of metal was all that remained of the USS Cyclops. A 9,000-ton ship, 240 human lives, advanced military equipment, all reduced to microscopic fragments scattered across the Pacific. The fisherman who found the metal tried to sell it as a curiosity, but American agents discreetly confiscated it, claiming it was part of a fallen satellite. The man received a generous sum of money and signed documents he couldn't read, and the fragment disappeared into yet another Pentagon vault. But the mystery deepens even further when we examine the hospital records of military personnel who served in the search and rescue operation. At least 37 sailors and divers who were in the area in the weeks following the Cyclops' disappearance developed unexplained medical symptoms. Progressive hearing loss, neurological problems, rare cancers that normally take decades to develop but appeared in a matter of months. The Navy denied any connection, attributing the cases to coincidences and unrelated factors, but the military doctors who treated these men themselves left notes in their personal files expressing deep concern about the pattern of symptoms. One of the scientists who worked on Project Poseidon, whose name remains censored to this day, left behind a series of letters that were only found after his death in 2003. In these letters, he described the weight of guilt he carried for decades. He admitted that the scientific team knew they were dealing with forces they didn't fully understand, but political and military pressure to produce results had pushed them forward recklessly. He wrote that in the evenings before the test, several team members had expressed concerns about the mathematical models, about possible amplification effects that had not been adequately tested, but their objections were ignored. The schedule was more important than safety. The Cold War demanded results, not caution. The technology of Project Poseidon did not die with Cyclops. Evidence suggests that research continued, albeit on a much smaller scale and with drastically increased safety protocols. Classified patents filed throughout the 1990s and 2000s reveal weapon systems based on electromagnetic resonance, although always described in vague terms and with supposedly non-lethal applications, such as underwater communication systems or geological mapping equipment. But experts who have analyzed these patents note that the technical specifications are consistent with directed energy weapons capable of affecting underwater targets. In 2016, an earthquake in the Pacific shifted part of the ocean floor precisely in the area where the Cyclops disappeared. High-resolution sonar images captured by an oceanographic research vessel revealed something extraordinary. The crater was still there more than 30 years later, but now partially exposed. And in the center of this crater was an anomaly, a structure or formation that did not appear natural. The ship's scientists wanted to investigate more closely, but direct orders from the United States Navy forced them to abandon the area immediately. The zone was once again declared restricted, and military ships began patrolling the perimeter. What really happened to the USS Cyclops that early morning in March 1984? The full truth may never be known, but the fragments of evidence paint a terrifying picture. A warship tested a weapon that manipulated the very fundamental forces of nature, a technology that transformed the ocean into a conductor of lethal energy. Something went terribly wrong. Perhaps the power was incorrectly calibrated, perhaps environmental conditions created an unforeseen resonance, or perhaps the weapon functioned exactly as designed and the result was so devastating that even its creators were horrified. 240 men died instantly, probably without even realizing what was happening. Their families received posthumous medals and sanitized stories about training accidents. Their true sacrifice, serving as unwitting guinea pigs in an experiment that surpassed all limits of reason and ethics, remains hidden. And somewhere in the depths of the Pacific, in that glassy crater at the bottom of the ocean, lies the unmarked grave of a ship that should never have been built and a weapon that should never have been tested. But the story becomes even darker when we discover that the USS Cyclops wasn't the first attempt. Partially declassified documents from 2019 revealed that there were preliminary tests, smaller experiments that preceded that fatal mission in March 1984. In November 1982, a small research vessel called the USNS Meridian conducted small-scale tests in the waters off Alaska. The crew of 43 reported severe side effects after only 15 minutes of operating the prototype weapon. Spontaneous nosebleeds, extreme disorientation, and 3 crew members fainted without apparent explanation. The medical report of that incident, which only came to light decades later, describes something disturbing. The crew members who fainted exhibited abnormal brainwave patterns for weeks after the test. It was as if the electromagnetic frequency generated by the device had directly interfered with human neurological activity. Military doctors recommended the immediate suspension of the project, arguing that the weapon posed unacceptable risks not only to enemies but to anyone nearby. These recommendations were ignored. The project had top priority, presidential approval, and a virtually unlimited budget. Nothing could stop it. In February of 1983, another test was conducted, this time with a more powerful prototype aboard the destroyer USS Bronson. The mission was aborted after the device's cooling system failed catastrophically, causing a fire that killed 5 crew members and left 12 others seriously injured. The Bronson managed to return to port, but the ship was quietly decommissioned 3 months later, officially due to obsolescence, although it had only been in service for 8 years. Shipyard workers who dismantled the Bronson later anonymously reported that the section where the device was installed showed bizarre structural damage, with metal corroded in ways that did not correspond to any known type of wear or heat damage. The scientists on Project Poseidon were toying with forces they were barely beginning to understand. The theory behind the weapon was elegant in its simplicity, but the reality of the physics involved was infinitely more complex. By generating low-frequency electromagnetic waves at extreme intensities, the device created what physicists call destructive resonance. Everything in the universe vibrates at specific frequencies, from atoms to massive structures like ships and submarines. If you can match that frequency exactly and amplify it, you can literally make the object self-destruct. vibrate until it disintegrates from the inside out. The problem is that the ocean is not a uniform medium. It has layers of water with different temperatures, salinities, and densities. These layers can reflect, refract, and amplify electromagnetic waves in completely unpredictable ways. What the Poseidon scientists discovered too late is that they weren't just firing a wave of energy at the water. They were creating a chain reaction that fed off the ocean's own characteristics. It was like lighting a match in a room full of gas, except the room was the entire Pacific Ocean. 3 weeks before the Cyclops fatal test, one of the project's lead physicists, Dr. Robert Halloway, sent an urgent memo to Navy Command. In that document, which was only discovered in the National Archives in 2021, Halloway warned that the latest computer models indicated a 12% probability of catastrophic amplification effects if the test were conducted at the planned location. He strongly recommended changing the test area to shallower, less stratified waters or, ideally, postponing the test until more accurate simulations could be performed. The memo was filed away without a response. 2 weeks later, Halloway was removed from the project under vague allegations of security concerns. He spent the next 20 years of his life working in obscure academic positions, effectively exiled from the military research community. In 1998, he attempted to publish a paper on the theoretical dangers of electromagnetic resonance weapons, but was prevented by court orders based on national security laws. Halloway died in 2006, bitter and silenced, taking with him knowledge that could have saved the Cyclops and its crew. The legacy of Project Poseidon extends far beyond the 1984 disaster. In the following years, there were a series of unexplained incidents involving submarines in various navies around the world. The Soviet submarine K-278 Komsomolets sank in 1989 in the Norwegian Sea under circumstances that have never been fully explained. Surviving crew members described simultaneous failures in multiple systems, exactly the type of collapse that would be expected from massive electromagnetic interference. The Australian submarine HMAS Collins suffered a catastrophic systems failure in 1996 that nearly resulted in its loss. The French submarine Emeraude was forced to surface in 1994 after its entire crew developed symptoms of severe disorientation. Were all these incidents mere coincidences, or was someone continuing to test improved versions of the Cyclops weapon? Intelligence analysts who studied these cases note disturbing patterns. All the incidents occurred in deep water. All involved system failures that defied conventional explanations. And in all cases, official investigations were quickly closed with vague conclusions. It is possible that multiple nations have developed their own versions of the technology, creating a secret arms race that no one knows exists. In 2007, an anonymous whistleblower leaked to an investigative journalist a series of photographs taken of the ocean floor in the area where the Cyclops disappeared. The images showed the crater in unprecedented detail, and at its center was something that appeared artificial, a partially buried metal structure, twisted at impossible angles, as if it had been melted down and instantly refrozen. Even more disturbing, sensitive instruments aboard the underwater vehicle that took the photos detected weak but constant electromagnetic emissions emanating from that structure. After more than 2 decades, something was still active at the disaster site. The journalist who received the photographs tried to publish the story, but his editor received a visit from federal agents the night before the planned publication. The photographs were confiscated as classified material. The journalist was threatened with charges under the Espionage Act, and the story was never published. The whistleblower was never publicly identified, but 3 scientists who worked on projects related to Poseidon died in separate accidents that same year: a car accident, a sudden heart attack, and a fatal fall at home. Authorities found nothing suspicious in any of the cases. The technology that destroyed the USS Cyclops represents one of the most profound dilemmas of the modern era. It is possible to create weapons so powerful, so fundamentally destructive, that even testing them poses an existential threat. The Manhattan Project at least produced bombs that could be controlled, stored, and to some extent contained. But a weapon that manipulates the very properties of the ocean, that can create unpredictable chain reactions across millions of cubic kilometers of water, that is a technology that cannot be truly controlled. And yet, somewhere, research continues. Naval research facilities around the world are working on projects with unremarkable names like long-range communication systems or advanced geological mapping. But the technical specifications reveal equipment capable of generating the same types of electromagnetic waves that destroyed the Cyclops. The difference is that now, 40 years later, computers are millions of times more powerful, mathematical models are infinitely more precise, and the temptation to improve what failed in 1984 is irresistible to certain minds. Today, if you search the official records of the United States Navy, you'll find a simple line about the USS Cyclops. Lost in training exercise, March 1984, causes undetermined. 240 names listed as active duty casualties. No mention of experimental weapons, no reference to Project Poseidon. No explanation for the crater at the bottom of the Pacific that still emits faint electromagnetic signals decades later. The families of these men grew old without answers. Some still place flowers on empty cenotaphs every March. And in some locked vault, the detailed plans for the weapon that killed their sons, husbands, and fathers remain stored, not as a warning of what should not be done, but as a technical manual awaiting the moment when someone decides that this time it will be different, that this time the calculations will be correct, that this time ambition will not overcome caution. The exclusion zone around that area of the Pacific remains in effect, officially for unspecified security reasons. And when fishermen occasionally report that their electronic equipment inexplicably fails when approaching that region, when pilots describe strange interference in their instruments while flying over those waters, the authorities offer no explanations. They only reinforce that the area should be avoided, because some secrets aren't kept to protect what happened, but to hide what might still happen.